Side 6. The Grey Ladies had pulled desks and filing cabinets out of the offices on either side and blocked off the whole corridor. The barricade was a couple of meters high, and it stretched back for twice that length. There was no chance of knocking it down. Lloyd stopped pushing his trolley, but Dinah didn't. She was frantically doing sums in her head. If they went fast enough, with the weight of the trolleys and the force of the impact, they might just... She leaned sideways as she drew level with Lloyd. "We'll have to go over," she muttered. "Get your trolley moving really fast and then climb up on top of the boxes." They began to scoot along the ground towards the Grey Ladies, building up speed. When the trolleys were thundering and swaying down the corridor, Dinah nodded, and she and Lloyd scrambled up on top of the boxes, crouching low so that they stayed hidden. The Grey Ladies didn't see them. Grinning confidently, they stepped apart to let the trolleys hit the barricade. Dinah gritted her teeth. Not yet, not yet. They'd spoil it all if they moved too soon. The barricade loomed closer and closer. Not yet, not yet. She left it until they were almost there, and then she hissed at Lloyd, "Now!" Rising to their feet, they ran forward on top of the boxes, just as the trolleys crashed into the heap of furniture. The force of the crash flung them forwards, right over the barricade. They slid down the far side and headed for the door. "You won't get away!" yelled the Grey Ladies. "The door is auto-locked!" "That's what you think," muttered Lloyd. "Come on, Di!" They flung themselves at the door, pushing the handle down. And it opened. Now it was the Grey Ladies who were trapped behind the barricade. Dinah heard their high heels scraping on wood as they tried to scramble over. "Quick!" she gasped, "before they make it!" She dashed through the door and found herself in the car park where the lorries were. She looked round wildly. "Where are we going?" "Stone Ozer," panted Lloyd. "Over there!" For a second, Dinah thought he had gone mad. Then she saw the huge snowplow parked at the top of the slope. "Oh, the snowdozer!" "All I could think of. I was hoping the others would be there already, but we'll have to wait." Lloyd took a step towards the snowplow, and then stopped dead, because it had begun to move. Slowly but surely, the huge machine was rolling down the hill towards them. But that's impossible," stuttered Dinah. "There's no one in it." Chapter 15. The Last Chance.
"Of course there's someone in it,"
hissed a scornful voice. Ingrid's head popped up behind the windscreen.
"Where did you think we were?"
"But..." Lloyd stared.
"You all escaped!"
Ian peered over Ingrid's shoulder, grinning. "They thought the stone-ozer was something to do with getting stones out of cherries, so they went herring off to the fruit canning workshop, and we sneaked out here." "But..." Lloyd was still startled. "Are you driving that thing?"
"Get in," Ingrid said impatiently. "Don't let them catch us."
The snowplow rolled closer, and Lloyd saw Mandy, hunched low behind the steering wheel. She grinned at him.
"We can't turn on the engine because we haven't got the keys, but we've taken off the handbrake, and it's downhill all the way to the gates. Once we really get rolling, no one will be able to stop this thing." "All we've got to do is find a phone," said Ingrid. "If we phone the television studios before 6:30...
"We can stop Hunky Parker 9!" Harvey bounced up and down on the back seat.
"It's not too late! We can still beat the headmaster!"
"But we haven't found the phone yet," drawled Ian, "so you'd better get in fast. Put your foot on the braking." Ingrid pressed the pedal, and Dinah and Lloyd scrambled in as the snowplow slowed down. It wasn't built to carry 6 people, but Dinah squashed in on top of Harvey and Ian, and Lloyd pushed his way into the driving seat, edging Mandy closer to Ingrid. "Let's go!" he hissed, grabbing the steering wheel. Ingrid took her foot off the brake, and the snowplow began to move again, gathering speed very quickly because it was so heavy. They rolled silently down the car park towards the buildings. Immediately ahead of them was the welcome suite, and behind it the glass walls of the dome glittering in the evening sunlight. On either side of the dome, the ground dropped away. To the right, the slope was covered with the grey, sprawling mass of the factory block. To the left were rows of bright little holiday chalets scattered all the way down the hill. There was a road in each direction. But which was the way out? Lloyd glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 5:15. Only an hour and a quarter until the start of Hunky Parker 9. They should be able to reach a phone in time to stop it, but only if he didn't make a mistake. Which way? He was so busy staring at the roads that he didn't even glance at the dome. It was Ingrid who gasped as they came out from behind the welcome suite.
Look! Look what's happening!
At the same moment, Mandy grabbed Lloyd's arm.
Stop! We've got to do something!
What? All the others were pointing now. Lloyd lifted his eyes and looked at the dome. It had gone crazy. From outside, it looked like a child's snowstorm that had been shaken roughly. The air was full of flying flakes of snow, so thick that Lloyd could hardly make out the figures inside. But he saw enough to know that something was wrong. There were plenty of people in ski suits, but weren't some people wearing swimming costumes? In the middle of the snowflakes, potted plants and sun loungers were rising out of the floor, and a jet of water shot down the water slide, freezing into icicles as it fell. "Snow tomorrow, sun today," said the big notice on the end wall, but the wall hadn't stopped. The whistle sounded, and it went on rotating. Sun tomorrow, snow today. More skiers crowded into the dome, blocking the entrances at the back so the sunbathers couldn't get out. Lloyd could see hundreds of people squashed together, struggling to move. Harvey blinked.
What's happening?
Everything's speeded up. Mandy sounded horrified.
It's changing, like it did before, but there's no break in between, so all the people have got squashed in together.
But why? Murmured Ian. Who did it? Dinah gulped.
I think... Oh, Lloyd, we did. Remember when you pressed the space bar on the computer? You wiped out the 8-hour delay.
The whistle sounded once more, and they saw the wall rotate again, spinning round to the other side. Skiers and sunbathers were crammed in together without any room to escape, and still the bell was ringing and the wall was turning faster and faster. No one could get out that way now. It was spinning continuously, so quickly that the words blurred into nonsense. Sun today, snow today, sun today. Snowflakes whirled away from the blowers at double speed, filling half the dome with a blizzard. But where they hit the heaters, they changed into boiling steam that billowed back at the holidaymakers. In between, a thick blanket of fog began to form, broken by the jets of icy water from the waterslide. People were elbowing their way towards the entrance, but there was no way out there either. The doors opened inwards, and the pressure of the crowd had jammed them shut. Children were shivering and crying. Frozen sunbathers were trying to share ski jackets, and drenched skiers were stifling in the steam.
We've got to stop, Mandy said desperately. We've got to help them.
She slid forward in the seat and jammed her foot down onto the footbrake.
We can't!
Lloyd tried to kick her foot away.
Look at the clock! We haven't got time!
They all glanced up at the giant pig clock on the front of the dome. The right nostril flickered as another minute clicked past, and the black numbers in the snout loomed threateningly. 17:20. Lloyd knew they had to go on.
If we stop the plough now, we'll probably get caught. And even if we don't, we'll run out of time. We'll be too late to ring the television studios.
I can't help that. Mandy jammed her foot down harder and tugged at the handbrake.
You go on if you like, but I'm going to help these poor people. They could die.
Standing up on the seat, she stepped over Ingrid and jumped out of the snowplow. Before anyone could stop her, she was running across the grass towards the dome.
She's right, Dinah said grimly. We did that to those people, Lloyd. We've got to rescue them. Come on, if we hurry, we might have time to find a phone as well.
But... For a second, Lloyd stayed where he was, watching the others scramble out. Should he go on by himself? It would only take one person to phone the television studios. Then he saw Mandy fling herself uselessly against the solid glass doors of the dome, and he knew he couldn't leave. The others hadn't got a clue. He was the only person with enough sense to organize a rescue. Jumping out of the plough, he ran towards the dome. "It's no use doing it on your own," he called. "We've got to hit the doors together, and the people inside have to stop pushing." Mandy looked round, not quite sure what he meant. But Dinah got the idea at once. She put her face against the doors and yelled,
"Step back! Just enough to let us push! Please!"
Some of the holidaymakers understood. The ones in front called back over their shoulders to the people behind, and slightly, very slightly, the crowd shifted. It was enough. It had to be enough. "Now!" yelled Lloyd. All 6 of them charged straight at the doors, throwing their weight against the glass, and the doors gave way. It was like uncorking a bottle. Immediately people started to pour out of the dome, raging and gasping and sobbing with relief. They might have been hypnotized before, but they were wide awake now, wide awake and furious. "It shouldn't be allowed! Where's the manager? We don't want the manager, we want the police! We want—" Lloyd looked at the angry faces. Then he looked up at the clock. It was still before 5:30. If he could persuade all these people to go looking for telephones, someone was bound to find one in time. He took a deep breath, ready to shout above the noise. But before he could say a word, everything inside the dome stopped. The blowers were still. The heaters shut off, and the end wall ground to a halt halfway round. The shouts died away as people turned round to look, puzzled and speechless. Nothing moved, except the last few flakes of snow fluttering to the floor, and there was no sound except the steady drip, drip, drip of melting ice. Then, from way overhead, the whistle sounded once more, and a great voice came booming down from the loudspeakers. "Nobody is to move. You are all feeling sleepy. Very, very sleepy."
"No,"
whispered Harvey.
"No! Don't listen to him!"
But it was too late. The holidaymakers had been hypnotized in the welcome suite when they first came to the sty. Now they had no choice, and they obeyed automatically. Lloyd saw their eyes close, and their faces grow blank as they turned towards the loudspeakers, waiting to be told what to do. "Quick!" he shouted. "We've got to get away! Now!" He led the dash to the snowplow, with the others close behind him, but they could hear the headmaster's voice booming above their heads. "There is a snowplow beside the dome. You will all go and surround it. It must not be permitted to move, and the people in it must not be allowed to escape. Is that clear?" The reply came from all over the crowd. Hundreds of people, speaking in the same dead, mechanical voices, exactly together. "Yes, Hunky!"
"Quick, quick!"
screamed Ingrid, throwing herself into the front seat.
"I'll take the handbrake off!"
She wrenched at it, while the others were still leaping in, and Lloyd spun the wheel to the right as the snowplow began to roll. Perhaps they could still make it. Perhaps. But it was no use. The crowd surged forward from the dome, spreading all round them. Dozens of people, men, women and children, stepped straight in front of the snowplow. "Brave!" shrieked Mandy.
"We're going to run them over!"
"They'll have to get out of the way," Lloyd said desperately. But he knew they couldn't. They were hypnotized, and they would do exactly what the headmaster had told them to. And even if the first people got run over, there were more behind them, and more behind that. There wasn't a hope of getting through. Grimly he jammed his foot down and pulled on the handbrake. As the snowplow stopped, he made one desperate effort to escape. But the moment he stood up, he was pushed down by dozens of hands. The holidaymakers were obeying the headmaster's orders. Exactly. They weren't going to let any of the children out. Sinking back into his seat, Lloyd looked round at the hundreds of blank, dull faces. There was nothing to be done. They could only wait for whatever the headmaster had planned. He turned and stared at the ugly, triumphant pig face on the front of the dome, and watched the minutes ticking away, on and on and on. 17:32, 17:33. They were still sitting there, almost an hour later, when the numbers clicked to the time they'd all been dreading. 18:30. Immediately, a great voice came booming out from the dome. "Yes, folks, that's it! It's Hunky Parker time!" Trumpets blared, and the crowd behind the snowplow began to separate, leaving a narrow path through from the dome. Down the path, walking very slowly, came a tall figure in a pig mask. He paced steadily towards them, his sea-green eyes flaming through the holes in the mask like frozen lightning. Lloyd stared back defiantly, waiting to hear what he would say. But the headmaster didn't say anything. Not for 15 minutes. He walked up to the snowplow and stood watching the clock on the dome as the numbers changed. Until they reached 6:45, he was completely silent. Then he did speak, rapping out the words so fiercely that even Ingrid didn't dare to argue. "Take off that ape suit!" She pulled off the mask and the big hairy suit and handed them over, and the headmaster turned to face the crowd. "What do you see?" The reply came back mechanically from hundreds of throats. "We see what Hunky tells us." The headmaster nodded and raised a hand. "Close your eyes. When you open them, Hunky will be gone, and you will see your new master." Obediently, all the holidaymakers closed their eyes. Only the 6 children in the snowplow went on watching as the headmaster's hands reached slowly up towards the Hunky Parker mask. He lifted it off, and they saw the face they had hoped never to see again. The colourless hair, the paper-white skin, and the huge, terrible eyes. The headmaster gazed across at them, and his mouth curled into a triumphant smile. "I have succeeded," he said softly. "Hunky Parker is finished, and tomorrow the whole country will be in chaos. People will be smashing and looting and rioting in the streets." "But why?" Lloyd gripped the steering wheel and glared up at him. "I thought you hated things like that." The headmaster's thin lips twisted cruelly. "Not if they are useful. And these riots will be, because only one person will be able to stop them. The man who has what they want." Lloyd gasped. "The ape goods! That's what they're for!" "Correct." The headmaster smiled even more unpleasantly. "When enough damage has been done, I shall stop the riots, and I shall take over the country." "But you can't." faltered Mandy. "I can and I shall," thundered the headmaster. "I shall take over everything, and there will be no more riots, no more crazes, no more choosing." He lifted his head, and his voice rang out over the sty. "I shall decide what people need, and I shall make them want it. They will produce it themselves in my factories, with no nonsense about wages, and they will think," his lip curled scornfully, "that they are on holiday." Dinah twisted her fingers together. "It'll be a country of slave robots, all making things for each other. What's the point of that?" "Efficiency," the headmaster said icily. He pulled on the hairy suit and dropped the great ugly mask onto his head. Lloyd shuddered. The costume had looked bad enough on Ingrid, but at least it had been baggy and faintly comic. Now it was terrifying. The headmaster turned to face the holidaymakers. "Open your eyes," he said. Hundreds of eyes opened, staring blankly and obediently at the enormous ape, and he glared back at them. "I am Ape. What do you see?" Lloyd clenched his fists. Surely it couldn't be that easy. Surely the crowd couldn't just change. But the answer came back without a second's hesitation. "We see what Ape tells us." Chapter 16. We Want Ape. Ingrid leapt to her feet.
"Don't be silly! It's all a trick!"
The holidaymakers stared back with smooth, untroubled faces, and the headmaster shook his huge masked head. "You are wasting your breath. They do not even hear you."
"Well, other people will,"
Harvey said fiercely.
"We'll tell everyone what you're up to."
The headmaster turned and looked at him. "I don't think so," he murmured. "I have other plans for you."
"Other plans?"
Harvey went pale. "I am going to send you to the chill room." None of them knew what he meant, but the way he said it made them shudder. Dinah lifted her chin and stared past him, avoiding his eyes. "What's the chill room?" "Where the snow is stored when it is not needed in the dome." The headmaster gave a small, unpleasant chuckle. "I think you will find it fatally cold." He turned away towards the holidaymakers and raised his voice to reach the very edge of the huge crowd. "What do you say?" "We see what Ape tells us." "What you see is the dome." The headmaster stepped away from the snowplow, and his massive hairy arm pointed towards the glass walls. "At the front is a door." The holidaymakers turned, their glazed eyes following his finger, and he began to give instructions. Lloyd and the others listened, their eyes widening in horror as the headmaster explained how they were to be shut up in the giant freezer. But Dinah hardly heard. The headmaster's first words were still ringing in her head. "What you see is the dome." He had made a mistake. The holidaymakers saw only what he told them, and he hadn't said a word about snowplows or children. For a few seconds at least, the 6 of them would be invisible to everyone in the crowd. Dinah nudged Ian and Harvey. "Come on," she mouthed. "He can go." The headmaster was still giving instructions with his back turned. Like shadows, they slid out of the snowplow, pushing their way between people in swimming costumes and people in ski suits. No one took any notice at all. We see what Ape tells us. Creeping on tiptoe, Dinah moved clear of the crowd and began to lead the way down the drive. But she was keeping an eye on the headmaster. As soon as he began to turn back, she yelled, "Run!" Grabbing Harvey's hand, she threw herself forward. They all sprinted down the drive, their eyes fixed on the gate that led out to the road. It was only 200 meters away, but the headmaster didn't mean to let them reach it. "Bring those children back!" he shouted. All together, the holidaymakers turned and began to run. Dinah glanced back and shuddered at what she saw. There was a wall of people sprinting down the drive, running with expressionless faces like robots who would never tire. Harvey moaned, gasping for breath, but she tugged him on. "Don't stop! We can make it if we run!" For a moment he believed her, and she felt him surge forward. But then his face changed, and he pointed down the drive towards the gate.
"It's no good, Di. We can't get out. There's people coming the other way, too."
Ingrid had seen them as well.
"Look!" she shrieked. "What are we going to do?"
Dozens of cars were driving through the gateway, 2 or 3 at a time, and behind them were more. The line stretched as far as Dinah could see, and the people inside the cars were chanting, shouting the same words over and over again at the tops of their voices. For a second, Dinah couldn't make out what they were saying, but when she did, her heart sank. "We want ape! We want ape! We want ape!" If they were shouting that, they must have seen HP9. The headmaster's plan was working. "Don't give up!" bellowed Lloyd. "Let's go and talk to them!" He went racing towards the cars. "No!" shouted Dinah. "They might be dangerous!" But he didn't listen. He ran on, and after a moment's hesitation, Dinah and the others raced after him. Even if it was dangerous, they were still splat. They stuck together. As they drew level with the first car, it slowed down to avoid hitting them. Without waiting for an invitation, Lloyd wrenched the rear door open and dived in. Dinah pulled Harvey after him, and the other 3 tumbled in too, squashed into the back seat. There was a shrill shriek from the little girl in front.
"Uncle Gareth!"
The driver glanced over his shoulder, frowning. "What's going on?" Ingrid leaned forward and gripped the front seat.
"There's an ape up there, and he's trying to get us."
The little girl shrieked again.
"We want ape!"
"We certainly do," her uncle said grimly. They were driving through the holidaymakers now, but that was no problem. "Bring those children back," the headmaster had said. And here they were, coming back on their own. So the crowd just parted to let them through. Uncle Gareth was looking from side to side, peering through the bushes. "Where is Ape?" he muttered. "That's who we've come for." Dinah swallowed.
"Why do you want him?"
"Because—" Uncle Gareth looked confused. "Because I saw him on the Hunky Parker program just now, and he's wicked. He has to be stopped." Dinah stared.
"The program made you think that?" "Oh, what does it matter about the rotten old program?"
Ingrid leapt up, pointing through the windscreen.
"There he is!"
Straight ahead of them, in the middle of the road, was the snowplow, and standing on the bonnet, facing them down the drive, was the tall figure of the headmaster in his mask and costume. "Ape!" Uncle Gareth's foot faltered on the pedal, and Dinah heard the chant behind them die away as the sea-green eyes stared out over the cars. The headmaster's voice boomed down the drive. "I am Ape, and this is the jungle. You must be feeling sleepy after your journey."
"No," thought Dinah. "He mustn't hypnotize them."
She wound down the window and yelled as loudly as she could.
"That's Ape! Get him!"
The headmaster was startled. For an instant he stopped speaking, And in that instant, Uncle Gareth opened his mouth and yelled ferociously, "Get Ape! Get Ape!" Immediately, the shout was repeated from every car in the drive. The headmaster's voice was drowned by the noise. For a split second, he glared down at Dinah. Then he turned and leapt into the driving seat of the snowplow. With a roar, the engine started and he swung the steering wheel, turning off the road towards the dome. "Oh, no, you don't, my boyo." Grimly, Uncle Gareth spun his own wheel. "We've got things to sort out with you." But he hadn't noticed the motorbike coming up behind him, weaving its way between the cars. As he swung left, he caught it broadside on, and it clattered over onto its side. The grey lady riding it was flung sprawling onto the grass, and a small black box flew out of her pocket. Uncle Gareth jammed on his brakes and leapt out of the car. Bending over her, she lifted her dazed head. "Are you all right?" Dinah leapt out too, but not to look after the grey lady. Her eyes were on the little black box. It was the cassette. HP9, she was sure of it. "Don't waste time!" bellowed Lloyd. "The headmaster's driving into the dome. What's he up to?" He jumped out of the car and began to race after the snowplow. Jamming the cassette into her pocket, Dinah ran too, with the rest of Splat close behind. When people saw what they were doing, they leapt out of the cars and followed, still keeping up the same steady chant, "Get Ape! Get Ape!" Dinah and the others were well ahead. But even so, by the time they reached the dome, the snowplow was already over at the far side, disappearing through the gap at the side of the swivelling wall. "Follow him!" Lloyd yelled. "He mustn't get away!" The 6 of them charged across the dome, slithering in half-melted snow and slipping on the trampled leaves of tropical plants. When they reached the gap, they ran straight through, in the tracks of the snowplow. Before anyone else could catch up, the huge wall began to turn, closing the space they had come through. "We'll be trapped!" squealed Harvey. "Get out!" "We can't," Lloyd said grimly. "We've got to know what the headmaster's doing. Come on!" He dragged Harvey through, just as the gap finally closed. They were alone, in a small grey lobby, with no way of turning back. Ahead, down a short corridor, they could see the first of the workshops. But the tracks of the snowplow did not go that way. They turned left, through a door labelled Chill Room. Lloyd didn't hesitate. "Come on!" Tugging the heavy door open, he led the way into a giant snowdrift. The huge, high room was packed with snow from floor to ceiling. Through the middle was a narrow corridor made by the snowplow, with great white walls 6 meters high. "It's cold!" wailed Harvey. "My nose is going blue!" "Try running," drawled Ian. "That'll warm you up." But he was wrong. They raced between the white walls at top speed, but by the time they reached the far side, they were all shivering uncontrollably. "What's in there?" said Ingrid. They were staring at another huge closed door. "Tropical room," it said. "Only one way to find out," shivered Lloyd. He pushed the door open, and instantly the shivers disappeared. They were sweltering. It was like being in a greenhouse. The room was stacked with hundreds of lush green plants, the ones that decorated the dome when it was sunny. The hot air was misty and damp, and huge green leaves spread everywhere. Except in the very centre of the room. There the snowplow had crashed a way through, leaving a slimy trail of shattered pots and mashed, ruined leaves. "That's where he went!" Without waiting to discuss it with the rest of them, Lloyd raced along the snowplow's track towards yet another door on the far side of the room. Dinah felt horribly uneasy. She wanted to stop for a second, to think about what they were getting into. But Ingrid and Ian were already well ahead of her, and even Harvey was so excited that he had forgotten to be afraid. Gritting her teeth, she ran on, towards the door marked Storeroom. This time, Lloyd waited until they had all caught him up. Then he looked round.
Ready?
Just get on with it,
Ingrid said. Her cheeks were scarlet and there was sweat running down her nose.
Open the door.
Right. Here we go.
Lloyd pressed down the handle, put his shoulder against the door, and pushed. And they found themselves staring straight into the eyes of Ape. Not one, but hundreds and hundreds of them. The room must have been 10 meters high, and from floor to ceiling it was stacked with things printed with that face. Tents and television cabinets, sweets and sweatshirts, ring files and rucksacks. From every corner of the room the ugly, snarling face glared at them, and the slogans yelled in jagged black letters, "Don't mess with Ape. Wanna make something of it? See this fist?" In the middle of it all was the snowplow, draped in the books and baby grows and tins of beans through which it had crashed. It was empty.
We've lost him,
Ingrid wailed as they walked into the room.
He's got away.
Indeed I have, boomed a voice above their heads. But you won't.
They looked up. There, in a gallery, high up near the roof, was the most terrifying ape figure of all. The headmaster. He was holding something small and black, and he raised his hand, pointing it towards the door. Dinah's eyes widened in horror.
It's a remote control! Quick!
But there was no chance to escape. Before she could even finish speaking, the huge door behind them swung shut, and they heard the click of the automatic lock.
You have defeated my plans this time, said the headmaster, but you will never defeat them again. You are trapped. In a moment, I shall press this remote control again, and the whole dome will explode, taking you with it.
And you,
Ingrid said defiantly.
Oh no, not me.
The headmaster turned slightly, and they saw that he was wearing a large metal backpack. Lloyd looked bewildered, but Dinah guessed what it was.
It's a rocket pack, isn't it? You're going to fly out through the roof.
Clever to the last, Dinah Hunter, the headmaster sneered. But your brains won't save you. I shall fly up out of danger, and then I shall press my remote control.
Harvey went dead white and clutched at Dinah's arm, and she looked round wildly. There had to be a way out. It couldn't end like this, but the door was too heavy to move. Then she saw the keys swinging in the ignition of the snowplow, and she realized that they had one last chance. Lloyd, could you drive that thing? Lloyd frowned.
Probably, if it's like a car, but I don't see...
High on the wall, the headmaster laughed out loud.
Ha, ha, ha! That won't get you out. The door is solid metal, 1 meter thick.
But I bet the walls aren't,
Dinah hissed in Lloyd's ear.
Come on, it's our only chance.
He understood at once. With a yelp, he jumped into the snowplow and started up the engine as the others leapt in. Then he put it into gear and pressed his foot down on the accelerator, steering straight for the end wall below the headmaster's gallery. In that glorious second, Dinah knew she was right, because the headmaster stopped sneering. He whipped round and pointed his remote control at the roof, pressing it furiously to open the skylight. But he was too late. The snowplow crashed into the wall, shattering it into a rain of bricks that clattered onto the roof of the cab. The gigantic figure in the gallery staggered wildly and then toppled forward, dropping the remote control as he fell.
Keep going,
Dinah yelled frantically.
We've got to get out before that remote control hits the floor.
She didn't need to explain, because they all saw it happen. As the snowplow crashed through to the car park beyond the dome, the little black box smashed into the ground, breaking into pieces. Then, with a great woof, everything behind them exploded. Machines and plants and snow went flying into the air in a shower of shattered panes of glass. And in the middle of the debris was a huge, hairy figure spinning up into the sky. They watched it for as long as they could, but they lost sight of it in the smoke as the remains of the dome began to burn. Uncle Gareth drove them all the way home. He insisted on it. But he seemed confused, and he never said a word when Mrs. Hunter asked if the school outing had gone well. He just smiled and accepted a cup of tea. While Mrs. Hunter was making it, Dinah pulled the HP9 cassette out of her pocket.
Do you mind if... We ought to watch this, Mum, to find out what happened.
These school trips... Mrs. Hunter shook her head and grinned at Uncle Gareth. So high-tech. He grinned back, vaguely, and Dinah and the others slid off into the sitting room.
We don't have to sit through the whole lot, she said, as she put the cassette into the video. But I want to know what happened. Why did all those people decide to march on the sty? It must be something to do with the subliminal frames.
Let's take a look, Lloyd said. Dinah fast-forwarded to the first one and pressed the freeze-frame button, and they all stared. They were gazing at themselves. 3 terrified, open-mouthed children, Ian and Harvey and Mandy, staring up at a 4th tall, hairy figure. Ingrid in the ape suit. That was how they had looked in the studio when Lloyd said, "It's the headmaster." The camera had caught them at just that moment, and their faces showed exactly how they felt.
I hit both buttons, Dinah whispered. The one that recorded that frame and the one that substituted it for the marked frames. And so, everyone who watched HP9 saw what the headmaster is really like, just from our faces.
Harvey shuddered again.
Do we have to go on looking at it?
Of course not. Mandy picked up the remote control and pressed the TV button. The video picture vanished, and they found themselves watching the very end of the late news. And finally, the newsreader was saying, strange reports are coming in of a giant ape seen flying over Wales. There have been several reliable sightings. A map of Wales flashed up, with 6 or 7 stars dotted over it to show where the ape had been seen. Then a brown, blurry picture appeared, with the words amateur video across the bottom. It was so unsteady that it was almost impossible to make out what was on the screen. But Dinah knew, and so did the others. The newsreader's voice spoke again, sounding amused. A helicopter has been sent up, and police confidently expect to apprehend the ape within the next few minutes. They did? Dinah wished she could be sure. Ian shook his head too, staring at the brown, blurry shape as it disappeared into a cloud. It would take more than a police helicopter.
That was Hunky Parker is Watching You by Gillian Cross. Read by Judy Bennett.